G'day. I can be a bit lazy at times, and so when things break I don't always fix them straight away. But one thing I was using the other day was my inch button die stock, and the thread has been stripped for quite some time, and I thought to myself I'd really better make up another one or fix that. Looking at it I couldn't fix it, so I made another one. So this is the story of doing that. This is the set that I'm trying to replicate the piece from. It's an old P&N, and according to the leaflet came in it, that stands for Patience and Nichols in Maryborough. Now, P&N are now part of the Sutton Tools group, and they're in Thomastown, so this certainly is an old kit. My estimates are probably something like 30 to 40 years old, and that depends on whether the person who originally bought it new, I guess. Anyway, this is the problem here. This is cast, and in fact I think the whole thing is cast. I think it's all one piece, but the thread has stripped in there. Now, I could have a go at welding that up, and I may do that sometime in the future, but I don't like my chances of a successful weld there. It's close to the edge, it's thin, it's cast, it's probably imbued years worth of oil and lubricants. So, you know, what I'm instead going to do is make up a new part here and then put some threaded rod in the ends to give myself a tapping wrench. It is ferrous, which is one point in its favour, but yeah, being cast it's not much fun, and you can tell it's cast because you can see there's a slight witness mark there from where the die parted. I guess the big characteristic of these is because they've got a spherical surface on them, and that's what makes it a little bit trickier to make. Casting, it's not a problem, you can do that, but with machining you're stuck with ball turning arrangements. Now, I could do this as a solid piece and then cut the cheeks off, but what I'm going to do is make this out of a bit of flat instead. I'm starting out with a long piece of rectangular bar stock. It's roughly the size that I need for the cross section. I've just put a corner to corner, and then put a centre pop in there. I'm going to drill that out with a centre drill on the drill press, and then I can mount that up on the lathe. I'm going to leave it long, simply because if I grasp that in a 4-jaw, I want to have plenty of room to swing my ball turning device so that I don't run into the chuck. Centering square or rectangular stock isn't really much more difficult than centering round stock in a 4-jaw, but there are a couple of things you need to look out for. First of all, when you're on a side like this, you need to rock it back and forth until you get a local minimum. Okay. Otherwise, you could be indicating when on the you know, a greater radius bit of stuff. Now, if this was square stock, I'd be okay. I could just pull back on the indicator stem, rotate round, and off I go. But unfortunately, as you can probably just see, if I do that, I can wipe out the tip of my indicator. So that's something you need to watch out for. Don't ask me how I know this. What instead I've done is I've zeroed on here, and then I've zeroed the dial on my cross slide here. And what I'm going to do is now just wind back a turn, which, no, I need to do 2 turns. Okay, I've wound back a turn. I can now come here, wind forward my 2 turns, and then I can try and work out where I am. So it looks like I'm 29 thou in front of the mark there. When doing this, I always put about 100 thou on there to start with, and that means that if I'm a bit under on one side, I can see where that is and adjust. So in this particular case, I'm 29 thou up, so I can just pull that in to 14.5. Fingers crossed everything will work out, and I'll have this piece of rectangular stock pretty much centered in my chuck. One other thing to note too, I've got my little 4-pronged device here, because this stock unfortunately is just about the right size, will disappear down the slots. So in order to give myself something good to work against, I've just put that in there. I've come in with a tool and just rounded that up. I'm going to come in with a parting blade, simply because it's the only thing I've got that really plunges well, and do the same thing here. The end boss is going to be far smaller, but if I bring this down too much, then I could have a problem with the thing whipping around and chatter. So I'm going to keep that as big as I can until I've got my roughing, at least my roughing out done, and then see about taking those down in size. This setup isn't ideal, but I do need the clearance for the ball turning device, and I don't really want to chop off my bar stock here somewhere and have this much go to waste. I've got clean up on my two circular bits, and it was a hell of an interrupted cut. As you can imagine, it was jumping all over the place. I now need to line things up for doing the ball turning bit. Now, what I've done is I've scribed a line, it's actually a couple of lines, to give me the centre of that piece that way and the centre of it that way. What I'm going to do is use the square I've got positioned here to actually line that up so it's vertical, and that's actually pretty close, about there. And that then means I can use my cross slide here to work out or pick up my centre that way, lock that. The centre this way is going to be where this is vertical and is swinging either side, and so I'll then manoeuvre that way and lock up the carriage. Now, hopefully by having everything locked up and just using this, the interruptedness of the cut will be far less, but we'll have to see. As you can see, I've gotten to a place, I'm starting to develop the shape, but I'm running into the round part here, so I'm going to have to reduce that down to, well, pretty much my final size, so I can then reshape this. I just did the last pass with the ball turning tool. There's a little bit of chatter there. The trouble is, if you go too slow, you get very poor surface finish, so it's a bit of a balancing act, but I'm going to give that a bit of a polish. The corners here, I've discovered that it's easier to actually clean those up with a file rather than try and get them in there with the ball turning tool. Just that's the way it is. Depends on the grind of the tool, I guess, and all that sort of thing. I've cleaned up the ends of this a little bit just to get a few marks out and make sure the two sizes are identical. I've also put a centre in the ends because I'll need that for drilling out later. Now, it hasn't turned out too bad. I've given this a light buff with some emery in the lathe, but you might just be able to see there's a mark there. Now, that's a chatter mark, I think, from tool bounce. Because this is an interrupted cut, the ball turning tool was thumping around a little bit, and so I think that's what that is. Now, I'd like to try and get rid of that if I can. This is thicker than it needs to be, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in some V-blocks and then just incline it slightly so that that surface is level with the edge there. Then I can run across with my milling cutter, and hopefully that'll take most, if not all, of that out. Then it's just a matter of flipping that over, and I can then, because I've got one flat surface, I can then just clamp that to the mill table if I wanted to, and do the other side. So I've flattened off both sides, nothing terribly complicated there, and I've just drilled the hole through. I guess you'd call it a clearance hole. Just a little bit over 3/4 of an inch, probably 3/4 of an inch is fine, that's not a problem. I'm now going to set up a boring head and just take that out to the inch of the button die, 3/8 deep, and everything will be, well, I won't say wonderful, but close to. One thing I did discover when I fitted this to my, put this in the case, is that these bosses here need to come down in size. These ones are relatively slim. I was hoping to leave them a little bit thicker, because just for strength purposes, but if I want to put it in that case, that's not going to happen. So I'll have to put this back in the lathe and take those ends down. Fortunately, I've got the centres there, I've got the round anyway, so I can do that without too many dramas at all. I'm up to putting the screw holes in for the to retain the button dies. Now this one I've already done. This is the middle one, and that was easy because I was able to put that on parallels. These being the same size, it was basically there, right? The way I'm doing the rest of these is that I've got a bit of 25.4 OD pipe. That fits in there quite nicely. I'm using that grub screw to secure. And then you may be able to pick up, I've got a scribed line down there. So what I'm going to do is use my square to basically get that on a 45-degree angle, find my, not tangent point, but you know the one, that's sitting there, and then I can drill down. The button dies are 3/8 of an inch thick, and so therefore this is 3/6. The line you probably can't see there, but there's a line which is 3/16 in from that bottom edge. So that's where the screws are going. So I've got that one there, I've got another one there, and I've got another one on the opposite side there to do. So powering along here, I've drilled the holes, tapped them, and as you can see, there's a nice flush fit there for the die. I do have a die holder which is 0.3 of a millimetre bigger in diameter than this one, and it feels most awful. So you need to get a reasonably close fit. These are on 1 inch button dies, so 25.4, and I think I'm on about 25.7 for that bore. I've put a screw in there locating in the V of the die, and most gratifyingly, I don't know whether you can see it or not, but the holes do line up, and that's always a bit of a worry with these things. You're never quite sure whether you've got it right until you actually try it. I've plotted it out on a bit of paper here with where the holes were, but you know, it's an assumption they're 45 degrees and not 42 or something like that. So anyway, that worked. So this now needs to go back to the lathe and be drilled and tapped for an M8 rod. I'm tapping the holes for the bars here, and what I've done, maybe it's better seen on this one, the bars are going to be diameter 8, so they need to be, the tapping size for that is 6.8, and so most of the hole is 6.8, but the top, 3 millimeters, I've made 8, and the reason for that is that when you tap something, particularly with a die, you get a little bit of a run out thing at the top. So this is slightly recessed so that when that bar is in there, you won't see that run out. It'll just be a sort of a smooth transition between here and here. I've just spent some time rounding some of these corners off and smoothing it out to make it look more casting like, but I think I've done a reasonable job. It's not quite as thick as this one, but the holes are in the right spot, and it looks the part. Next stop is a bit of paint on there to finish the job. When I trial assembled this and threaded that into there, I discovered that the holes that I'd threaded in the ends here weren't exactly square, and it would have been only a half a degree or a degree out, but I'd notice it and I wouldn't feel terribly comfortable with it. So what I've done is I've gone and drilled out the ends there, put and taken the thread down, then put a brass sleeve on there. I put a bit of brass on there, then I've chucked that up and turned that down to the right size. The reason for brass, and that sleeve is less than a millimetre thick, by the way, the reason for brass was that Loctite and brass get along really well, and so I was able to push this on with some Loctite, and that's going to basically keep that there forever. and dry and sets very quickly. I'm now going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a bit of Loctite in here, push that in, and then I'll have, because I drilled this hole out hanging onto this handle, these two handles will actually appear, you know, straight and in line and all that sort of thing. So yeah, bit of a mistake on my part, but one of the important things with this sort of stuff is knowing how to fix your mistakes. So, you know, it's not quite as I wanted it, but it'll certainly look a little bit better, and so I'm happy with that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you for the next one.